Welcome to Craziest HOA Moments. The release fee was the whole plan. I will not be disrespected. Nancy White screamed it across the parking lot, her voice cutting through the midday heat like a knife. She stood next to my car, waving a tow truck remote control in the air like it was a loaded weapon, her face twisted into something between rage and triumph. The wheel lift arm on the tow truck behind her was already extended, inches from my front tire, the hook chain gleaming in the bright Wisconsin sun. I checked my watch for the third time in 5 minutes. I had a notary appointment booked in 2 hours, and missing it would delay my sworn statements for weeks. My ex and I were locked in a custody and visitation routine, and every delay meant another cycle of scheduling hell. Nancy knew that. She had to know that. "This is not parking, it is a violation," Nancy shouted again, jabbing a finger at my windshield. The temporary paper permit I had taped there that morning was perfectly visible, the edges crisp, the state seal clear. But Nancy was not looking at the permit. She was looking at the registration sticker on my license plate. "Your registration expired 3 weeks ago," Nancy said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "That makes this an HOA violation, and I am authorized to tow for safety reasons. I work as a mailroom supervisor at a corporate office. I hate chaos. I hate disorder. I especially hate people who make up rules on the spot and then enforce them like they are written in stone." Nancy White, vice president of the Preserve at Oak Grove Design Review Association, was all three of those things wrapped into one blonde ponytail and a black light jacket. "I moved to Madison 6 months ago for the custody arrangement. The Preserve at Oak Grove was supposed to be a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where you could park your car and not worry about it. Instead, it turned into a parking enforcement war zone the first week I moved in." Nancy patrolled the streets like she was running a toll booth, slapping bright orange windshield stickers on anything that looked remotely out of place. The stickers said violation in bold letters, but the details were always missing. Just a vague threat and a phone number that went to voicemail. "Nancy, my registration is current," I said, keeping my voice level. "The sticker on the plate is from last month. The DMV sent me the renewal. It is in my glove box if you want to see it." Nancy smirked. "The sticker looks faded to me. That means it is unreadable, which means it is invalid. Keep arguing. You are making my case for me." The tow truck driver, a guy in a reflective vest with a clipboard, looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Nancy, then at me, then back at Nancy. I could see him doing the math in his head, trying to figure out if this was worth the liability. "Ma'am," the driver said slowly, "if his registration is current, I cannot tow for that. The contract says HOA violations only, not state violations." Nancy turned on him like a snake. "This is an HOA violation because expired registration creates a safety risk. Fire lanes, insurance liability, all of it. You are authorized to tow under Section 12 of the Enforcement Manual." The driver looked at his clipboard. "There is no Section 12 on my authorization sheet." Nancy pulled out her phone and started tapping furiously. I waited. I had learned in the past 6 months that waiting was often the best move with Nancy. She would overplay her hand if you gave her enough rope. I checked my watch again. 1 hour and 45 minutes until the notary appointment. I needed to leave in 30 minutes to make it. Nancy saw me check the watch and smiled. "Got somewhere to be?" she asked, her voice sickly sweet. "Yes," I said flatly. Nancy leaned closer, her voice dropping to a mock whisper. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you parked illegally." "I parked in my assigned spot," I said. "The one with my unit number painted on the curb. The one I pay for in my HOA dues." Nancy waved the tow truck remote again. "Your assigned spot does not exempt you from compliance. If you are in violation, you can be towed from anywhere in the community. That includes your driveway." The tow truck driver shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I need a signed authorization form before I can proceed. Do you have one?" Nancy's smile faltered for a second, then snapped back into place. I have verbal authorization from the board president. That is sufficient under emergency enforcement protocols. The driver looked at me. Is this an emergency? I shook my head. Not unless you count her needing to feel important. Nancy's face went red. You do not get to talk to me like that. I am an elected officer of this association, and I have the authority to enforce community standards. If you refuse to comply, I will add obstruction charges to your violation notice. I walked past Nancy to my car, unlocked the glove box, and pulled out the registration renewal notice. The sticker on my plate was from 3 weeks ago, bright and legible. I held the paper up so the tow truck driver could see it. The driver squinted at the plate, then at the paper, then nodded. That sticker looks current to me, he said. I cannot tow for this. Nancy grabbed the remote and pointed it at the truck. The wheel lift arm jerked, moving another inch closer to my tire. If you move that arm 1 more inch, I said to Nancy, I am calling the police and reporting this as theft in progress. Nancy laughed. Go ahead. Call them. They will tell you the same thing I am telling you. HOA enforcement is a civil matter, not criminal. They will not touch this. I pulled out my phone and dialed. Nancy watched me, her smile widening. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. Tow truck on private property, dispute over registration, HOA officer threatening to tow without proper authorization. The dispatcher asked if the vehicle was legally registered. I said yes. She asked if the tow truck driver had signed paperwork. I said no. She said an officer would be out within 20 minutes. Nancy's smile evaporated. You just wasted everyone's time. I put the phone back in my pocket. We will see. The tow truck driver lowered the wheel lift arm and stepped back. I am not towing without a signed form, he said to Nancy. If you want to pursue this, get the paperwork and call dispatch again. Nancy turned on him, her voice rising. You work for the HOA, not for him. I am telling you to tow this vehicle under emergency authority. The driver shook his head. I work for the towing company, ma'am. The HOA is a client, but I am not moving a vehicle without proper documentation. If I do that, the company gets sued, and I lose my license. Nancy stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked back to her own car, a silver sedan parked 2 spots down. She yanked open the door and climbed in, slamming it hard enough to make the windows rattle. A moment later, she pulled out of the parking lot and disappeared around the corner. The tow truck driver looked at me and shrugged. Sorry about that. She calls us 3-4 times a week. Most of the time, it is nothing. Does she ever have proper paperwork? I asked. Sometimes, the driver said, but usually it is complaints about guest passes or fire lane violations that turn out to be someone parked legally. The company is about to drop the HOA contract because of all the false calls. I thanked him and watched as he retracted the wheel lift arm, climbed into the cab, and drove off. The bright orange windshield sticker Nancy had slapped on my glass during the argument fluttered in the breeze, stuck to the corner of the windshield like a badge of shame. I peeled it off and looked at it. The word violation was printed in bold letters, but there was no citation number, no violation code, no details at all, just a phone number and a vague warning about fines. I checked my watch. 1 hour and 30 minutes until the notary appointment. I could still make it if I left now. But I did not leave. Instead, I walked back to my apartment, grabbed my laptop, and sat down at the kitchen table. I opened a new document and started writing down everything that had just happened. Date, time, location, witnesses, exact words Nancy had used, the tow truck driver's name and company, the registration renewal notice, the bright orange sticker. I had learned early on that the only way to survive the preserve at Oak Grove was to keep a paper trail. Nancy thrived on chaos and intimidation. She counted on people not fighting back, not documenting, not calling her bluff. I had moved to Madison because my ex and I had agreed on a shared custody arrangement. Our daughter stayed with me every other week, and the schedule was ironclad. Miss a pickup, lose a week. Miss a week, and the lawyers got involved. Nancy had figured out the custody routine within a month of my moving in. She started timing her enforcement sweeps to coincide with my daughter's visits. Guest parking violations when my ex dropped her off. Fire lane complaints when I parked near the playground. Permit issues when family visited for birthdays. The HOA rulebook was 140 pages of vague threats and contradictory policies. Guest passes were required for all non-resident vehicles, but the passes had to be requested 48 hours in advance and approved by the board. Fire lanes were marked with faded red paint that was almost invisible in some spots, and Nancy claimed anything within 6 feet of the curb was a fire lane. Temporary permits like the one I had in my windshield were allowed, but only if they were issued by the HOA office, not the state DMV. Nancy had built a system where compliance was impossible, and enforcement was arbitrary. She could tow you, fine you, or slap a sticker on your car whenever she wanted, and the rule book would back her up because the rule book was designed to be unreadable. I finished the incident report and saved it to a folder I had created 6 months ago. The folder was labeled HOA documentation, and it already had 43 files in it. Violation notices, emails, photos, recordings, meeting minutes, anything I could get my hands on. I had started recording every interaction with Nancy after the second week, when she had threatened to fine me for leaving my trash can out past 7 in the morning. The fine had been $80. I had paid it, documented it, and started planning. I checked my watch again, 1 hour and 15 minutes. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The notary appointment was at a small office downtown, tucked between a coffee shop and a used bookstore. I made it with 10 minutes to spare. The notary, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses on a chain, looked over the sworn statement I had prepared. It was a detailed account of Nancy's harassment pattern, complete with dates, times, and witness names. The statement was part of a larger complaint I was building, but I needed it notarized before I could file it with the county. The notary signed, stamped, and handed the document back to me. She did not ask questions. I paid the fee, thanked her, and left. When I got back to the preserve at Oak Grove, there was another bright orange sticker on my windshield. This one was bigger, covering half the driver's side glass. The word violation was printed 3 times in a row, and underneath was a handwritten note in black marker that said final warning and tow authorization pending. I peeled the sticker off and added it to the folder. Then I walked across the parking lot to the HOA office, a small converted garage unit near the front gate. The office was open 3 days a week, and today was one of them. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office manager, a tired-looking guy named Derek, glanced up from his desk. He saw me and sighed. "Let me guess," he said. "Nancy." I nodded. She tried to tow my car this morning, claimed my registration was expired. Derek rubbed his temples. "Was it expired?" "No." "Did you show her the renewal?" "Yes." "Did she back down?" "No." She called a tow truck and tried to have it lifted anyway. The driver refused because there was no signed authorization. Derek leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "I cannot keep doing this. She calls me 5 times a day with complaints. Half of them are not even violations. The other half are things she made up." "Can you stop her?" I asked. Derek laughed bitterly. "Stop her? She is the vice president. The board president is her best friend. The treasurer is her cousin. I am just the guy who answers the phone and processes the paperwork. If I push back, she will have me fired." "What about the management company?" I asked. "Can they do something?" Derek shook his head. "The management company gets paid by the HOA. They do what the board tells them to do. If the board says tow, they tow. If the board says fine, they fine. They do not care if it is legal or fair. They just want the check to clear." I waited. Derek looked at me, then sighed again. "Look, He said quietly, "I should not be telling you this, but Nancy has been building a case file on you. She has photos, complaint logs, the whole thing. She is trying to get you fined into foreclosure so the HOA can force a sale." I felt my stomach drop. Foreclosure. That was the endgame. If the HOA stacked enough fines and late fees, they could put a lien on my unit and eventually force a sale to recover the debt. It was legal in Wisconsin, and it happened more often than people realized. HOAs had more power than landlords in some ways, because they could fine you for things that were not even violations, and then use the legal system to collect. "What kind of case file?" I asked. Derek glanced at the door, then pulled a manila folder out of a drawer. He slid it across the desk. I opened it. Inside were photos of my car parked in my assigned spot, printed emails where I had asked for clarification on guest pass rules, and a typed summary of alleged violations. The summary listed 12 separate incidents over 6 months, each one tagged with a fine amount. The total was over $4,000. "None of these are real violations," I said, flipping through the pages. "Half of them are things I never did. The other half are complaints about things that are not even against the rules." Derek nodded. "I know. But Nancy does not care. She submits these to the board approves them, and then the management company sends you the bill. If you do not pay, they add late fees and interest. Eventually, they file a lien." "How do I fight this?" I asked. Derek hesitated. "You need evidence that Nancy is acting in bad faith. If you can prove she is targeting you unfairly, you might be able to get the board to back down. But it has to be airtight. Photos, recordings, emails, everything." "I already have that," I said. "I have been documenting every interaction for 6 months. Derek looked at me with something like hope. "Then you might have a shot. But you need to be careful. Nancy is not going to roll over just because you have paperwork. She will escalate." "I know," I said. "She already tried to tow my car." Derek closed the folder and slid it back into the drawer. "If you go after her, do it publicly. File a complaint with the board, request a hearing, make sure there are witnesses. If you do it quietly, she will bury you." I thanked Derek and left the office. Outside, the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, the bright midday light giving way to softer afternoon shadows. I checked my watch. My daughter was supposed to arrive in 3 hours for her week with me. I needed to clean the apartment, pick up groceries, and make sure everything was ready. But first, I needed to deal with Nancy. I went home and pulled up the HOA meeting schedule. The next board meeting was in 2 weeks. Residents were allowed to attend and submit comments, but they had to request speaking time 48 hours in advance. I drafted an email to the board president, requesting 5 minutes to address parking enforcement concerns. I attached a summary of the incident with Nancy and the tow truck, along with copies of the registration renewal and the tow driver's statement. Then, I hit send. The response came back in less than an hour. The board president, a woman named Diane, wrote that my request had been received and would be considered. She added a note at the end that said all complaints must follow proper channels, and that residents who engage in harassment or defamation will be subject to additional fines. I read the note 3 times. It was a warning shot. Nancy had already talked to Diane, and Diane was closing ranks. I needed backup. I opened my contacts and scrolled through until I found the name I was looking for. A local mediator named Alan Carter. I had met Alan at a community event a few months ago, and he had given me his card after hearing about some of the HOA issues I was dealing with. Alan specialized in HOA disputes, and he had a reputation for keeping things legally clean. I called him. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Alan, this is the guy from the preserve at Oak Grove," I said. "We talked a few months ago about the parking enforcement problems." "I remember," Alan said. "Has it gotten worse?" "Much worse." I gave him a quick summary of the tow truck incident, the case file Derek had shown me, and the board's response to my meeting request. Alan listened without interrupting. then asked a few clarifying questions. "You have been documenting everything?" Alan asked. "Yes. Photos, recordings, emails, the whole thing." "Good. That gives you leverage. But you need to be strategic. If you go into that board meeting and start accusing Nancy of harassment, she will turn it around and make you look like the problem. You need to frame it as a policy issue, not a personal attack." "How do I do that?" I asked. Alan paused. "You need to show a pattern of inconsistent enforcement, not just against you, but against other residents. If you can prove that Nancy is applying the rules selectively, the board will have a harder time defending her. Do you know anyone else who has been targeted?" I thought about it. There was a woman in the unit next to mine who had complained about guest pass rejections. A couple on the second floor had been fined for leaving their garage door open during the day. A retiree near the front gate had been cited for parking his RV in his driveway for more than 72 hours. "Yes," I said. "I know a few people." "Talk to them," Alan said. "Get their stories. If they are willing to go on the record, bring them to the meeting. The more people who speak up, the harder it is for the board to ignore the problem." "What if they do not want to get involved?" I asked. "Then you go alone," Alan said. "But make sure you have your evidence organized. Bring copies for everyone on the board. Do not let them dismiss you as one angry resident. Show them the data." I thanked Alan and hung up. Then I spent the next hour knocking on doors. The woman next to me, Maria, answered immediately. She had been dealing with Nancy for almost a year. Guest pass denials, parking citations, noise complaints that were clearly fabricated. Maria was furious, but she was also scared. Nancy had threatened to fine her into foreclosure if she kept complaining. "I am willing to talk," Maria said, "but I cannot go to the meeting. If Nancy finds out I spoke against her, she will make my life hell." "I understand," I said. "Can I at least document your complaints? Dates, violation notices, anything you have?" Maria nodded and disappeared into her apartment. She came back 5 minutes later with a shoebox full of paperwork. Violation notices, emails, photos, everything. I thanked her and moved on to the next unit. By the end of the evening, I had talked to 6 residents. All of them had stories. All of them were afraid to speak up. But all of them were willing to let me use their documentation. I went back to my apartment and started organizing everything into a single master file. Photos, violation notices, emails, recordings, witness statements. I cross-referenced dates and looked for patterns. What I found was stunning. Nancy had issued over 200 violation notices in the past year. 80% of them were for parking-related issues. 60% of those were for things that were not even violations according to the HOA rulebook. Guest pass denials, fire lane complaints, expired permit claims, all of it was fabricated or exaggerated. The few violations that were legitimate were enforced inconsistently. Some residents were fined immediately. Others were given warnings. Some were never fined at all. The pattern was clear. Nancy was targeting people she did not like, people who had complained about her, people who had challenged the board. I was at the top of that list, but I was not alone. If this kind of HOA chaos gets you fired up, hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. I waited for the right audience, because the reveal needed witnesses. The board meeting was not going to be enough. Nancy would have Diane and the rest of the board in her corner and they would dismiss my complaints as sour grapes. I needed a bigger stage. I needed leverage that the board could not ignore. That leverage came 3 days later, in the form of an attorney letter. The letter arrived in my mailbox on a Wednesday afternoon. It was from a law firm I had never heard of, addressed to me personally. The letterhead was fancy, the language was aggressive, and the tone was pure intimidation. The letter claimed that I had violated multiple HOA covenants, including parking restrictions, guest pass rules, and noise ordinances. It demanded immediate payment of $4,200 in fines and late fees, plus an additional $500 in legal costs. If I did not pay within 10 days, the HOA would file a lien against my unit. I read the letter twice, then called Alan. They just sent me an attorney letter, I said. $4,000 in fines, plus legal costs. They are threatening a lien. Alan swore under his breath. That is escalation. They are trying to scare you into paying before the board meeting. What do? I asked. Do not pay, Alan said. Not a cent. If you pay, you are admitting liability, and that makes it harder to fight later. Respond in writing. Say you dispute the charges and request a formal hearing. Copy the board president, the management company, and the attorney. Make them put everything on the record. What if they file the lien anyway? I asked. Then we fight it in court, Alan said. But they probably will not. Filing a lien is expensive, and if they do not have solid grounds, they risk getting countersued. The letter is mostly bluff. They are betting you will fold. I am not folding, I said. Good, Alan said. Draft your response tonight and send it tomorrow. Make it professional, factual, and firm. No emotion, no personal attacks. Just the facts. I hung up and started writing. The response took me 2 hours. I disputed every charge in the attorney letter, cited the specific HOA rules that contradicted each violation, and demanded copies of all supporting documentation. I requested a formal hearing before the board, with the right to present evidence and call witnesses. Then I sent it to the attorney, the board president, the management company, and Derek in the HOA office. The next morning my phone rang. It was Diane, the board president. We need to talk, Diane said, her voice clipped. I am happy to talk, I said. But anything we discuss should be on the record. Can we schedule a formal hearing? Diane sighed. This does not need to be a hearing. This is a simple dispute. Nancy flagged some violations, we sent you a notice, and you refused to comply. If you pay the fines, we can move on. I am not paying fines for violations I did not commit, I said. And I am not going to let Nancy weaponize the HOA rules to harass me. Diane's tone hardened. Nancy is doing her job. She is enforcing community standards, and if you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the board. That is exactly what I am doing, I said. I requested speaking time at the next meeting. Are you going to grant it, or do I need to file a formal complaint with the county? Diane went quiet for a moment. Then she said, You will have 5 minutes at the meeting, but if you use that time to attack Nancy personally, I will shut you down. I hung up and checked my watch. 10 days until the meeting, 10 days to prepare. I spent the next week gathering more evidence. I reviewed security camera footage from the parking lot and found 3 separate incidents where Nancy had slapped bright orange stickers on cars that were parked legally. I interviewed more residents and collected additional violation notices. I cross-referenced Nancy's enforcement actions with the HOA rulebook and found over 30 instances where she had cited violations that did not exist. But the real breakthrough came from something I had not expected. I was reviewing footage from a late-night patrol Nancy had conducted 2 weeks earlier. The footage showed her walking through the parking lot with a flashlight, checking license plates and windshields. At one point, she stopped in front of my car, pulled out a roll of bright orange stickers, and slapped one on my windshield. The sticker said violation, but there was no citation number, no violation code, nothing. Just the word and a vague threat. But that was not what caught my attention. What caught my attention was the small body camera clipped to Nancy's jacket. The camera was running. The little red light was blinking. I replayed the footage 3 times to make sure. Then I called Alan. Nancy has been recording her patrols, I said. She has a body camera. If she recorded herself placing that sticker on my car, she might have also recorded herself admitting what she is doing. Alan went quiet. If she did, that is your trump card. But you need to get that footage. Do you know how to request it? It is HOA property, I said. If she was acting in her official capacity, the recordings are part of the HOA records. I can request them under the association bylaws. Do it, Alan said. Request everything. Body camera footage, meeting recordings, email logs, the whole thing. Make the request formal and in writing. They have to respond within 30 days. What if they refuse? I asked. Then we subpoena it, Alan said. But that takes time, and you do not have time. Push hard. Threaten legal action if you have to. Make them understand that you are serious. I drafted a records request that night. It was 5 pages long, single-spaced, and cited every relevant section of the Wisconsin HOA statutes. I requested all body camera footage from Nancy's patrols over the past 6 months, all email correspondence related to parking enforcement, all meeting minutes where my name or unit number was mentioned, and all financial records related to fines and late fees. Then I sent it to the board, the management company, and Derek. The response came back 2 days later. The board denied the request, claiming that body camera footage was not part of the official HOA records and that releasing it would violate Nancy's privacy. I forwarded the denial to Alan. He called me 10 minutes later. They just gave you leverage, Alan said. If they claim the footage is private, then Nancy was not acting in her official capacity when she recorded it. That means every enforcement action she took while wearing that camera is suspect. You can argue she was conducting personal surveillance, not HOA business. Can I use that at the meeting? I asked. Absolutely, Alan said. But do not reveal it too early. Let Nancy dig herself in. Let her claim she was following proper procedures. Then drop it. I hung up and added the denial letter to the evidence file. Then I checked my watch. 3 days until the meeting. The night before the meeting, I got a call from Derek. You need to know something, Derek said, his voice low. Nancy knows you are bringing evidence. She has been preparing a counterattack. She is going to claim you have been harassing her, intimidating her, and making threats. She has emails, photos, the whole thing. Are the claims real? I asked. No, Derek said, but that does not matter. She is going to make you look like the aggressor. The board is already on her side. If you go in there without a plan, they will shut you down. What do you suggest? I asked. Derek hesitated. Bring witnesses. Bring documentation. And do not get emotional. If you lose your temper, she wins. I thanked Derek and hung up. Then I called Maria, the woman next door. I need you to come to the meeting, I said. Maria went quiet. I told you I cannot do that. I know, I said. But if you do not, Nancy is going to win. She is going to keep targeting people, keep fining people, and keep using the HOA as a weapon. You do not have to speak. Just show up. Let the board see that I am not the only one. Maria sighed. If I do this, and Nancy finds out, she will come after me. She is already after you, I said. The only difference is whether you fight back. Maria was silent for a long moment. Then she said, I will be there. The board meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small room with folding chairs and a long table at the front. Diane sat in the center, flanked by Nancy on one side and the treasurer on the other. A board member I did not recognize sat at the far end, watching everything with a carefully neutral expression. I arrived 15 minutes early with Maria and 2 other residents who had agreed to come. We sat in the back row. Nancy saw us walk in and her face went pale, then red. She leaned over and whispered something to Diane. Diane nodded and made a note on her clipboard. The meeting started with routine business. Budget updates, landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules. Then Diane called my name. We have a resident comment period, Diane said, her voice flat. You requested 5 minutes to address parking enforcement. You have the floor. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I placed a folder on the table in front of Diane, then turned to face the board. Over the past 6 months, I have been targeted by inconsistent and unlawful parking enforcement, I said. I have documented over 200 violations issued by Vice President Nancy White, 80% of which are parking related. 60% of those violations are not supported by the HOA rulebook. I have brought copies of the violations, the rulebook, and witness statements from other residents who have been similarly targeted. Nancy stood up, her face twisted in anger. This is defamation. You are accusing me of unlawful conduct without evidence. I have evidence, I said calmly. I opened the folder and pulled out the first set of documents. These are violation notices issued to me and 5 other residents. None of them cite a valid rule from the HOA covenant. Several of them reference sections that do not exist. Nancy grabbed one of the notices and scanned it. This is a legitimate fire lane violation. There is no fire lane at that location, I said. I checked with the city fire marshal. The red curb paint is faded and does not meet municipal standards. The HOA has no authority to enforce fire lane restrictions that are not recognized by the city. Diane leaned forward. Do you have documentation from the fire marshal? I pulled out a printed email and handed it to her. Yes, the fire marshal confirmed that the curb in question is not an active fire lane and that the HOA cannot issue citations for violations that do not exist under city code. Diane read the email, then set it down. She looked at Nancy. Nancy sat down, her jaw tight. I continued. In addition to the invalid violations, I have evidence that Vice President White has been conducting late-night patrols with a body camera. During these patrols, she has placed violation stickers on vehicles without proper authorization and without following the notice procedures outlined in the HOA bylaws. Nancy stood up again. That is a lie. I have never conducted unauthorized patrols. I pulled out a photo from the folder. This is a still frame from the parking lot security camera. It shows you placing a violation sticker on my windshield at 11:30 at night. You are wearing a body camera. The camera is recording. Nancy's face went white. That footage is private. If the footage is private, then you were not acting in your official capacity as an HOA officer, I said. That means every enforcement action you took while wearing that camera is suspect. The room went silent. Diane looked at Nancy, then back at me. What are you asking for? I am asking for a full audit of all parking enforcement actions over the past year, I said. I am asking for the HOA to refund any fines that were issued for violations that are not supported by the covenant. And I am asking for the board to adopt a formal enforcement policy that requires proper documentation and notice before any fines are issued. Diane looked at the other board members. The treasurer nodded slowly. The board member at the end of the table stayed silent, still pretending to be neutral. Nancy leaned forward, her voice rising. This is about safety. This is about protecting the community. If we do not enforce the rules, the neighborhood becomes chaos. The rules you are enforcing do not exist, I said. And the violations you are issuing are not about safety. They are about control. Nancy's face twisted. Keep arguing. You are making my case for me. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. Then I pulled out the final document from the folder. This is a documented log of repeated gate access failures tied to your admin account, I said. Over the past 6 months, the front gate has malfunctioned 17 times. Each time the malfunction was traced back to an administrative override initiated from your account. During those malfunctions, residents were locked out of the community, delivery drivers were unable to access the property, and emergency vehicles were delayed. Nancy stood up, her chair scraping loudly. That is not true. I present it during the final showdown and quote your own words back to you, I said, looking directly at her. You told Derek in an email that the gate overrides were necessary to enforce parking compliance. You said, and I quote, if residents cannot follow the rules, they do not deserve access. Diane grabbed the document and read it. Her face went pale. She looked at Nancy, then at the treasurer, then back at me. This is a serious allegation, Diane said slowly. It is documented, I said. The email is in the HOA server. The gate logs are in the security system. If you audit the records, you will find everything I just described. Nancy stood frozen, her mouth open, her face red. Then she grabbed her bag and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The room erupted. Residents started talking, some standing up, some pointing at the door. Diane banged her hand on the table. "We need to take a recess," Diane said. "The board will review the evidence and reconvene in 15 minutes." I sat down next to Maria. She looked at me, her eyes wide. "Did that just happen?" Maria whispered. "Yes," I said. The board reconvened 20 minutes later. Diane looked exhausted. The treasurer looked grim. The neutral board member at the end of the table finally spoke. "After reviewing the evidence, we have decided to suspend all pending fines against the residents named in the complaint," the board member said. "We will conduct an independent audit of parking enforcement actions over the past year. Any fines that are found to be unsupported by the covenant will be refunded." "What about Nancy?" someone in the audience asked. Diane hesitated. Vice President White has stepped down from her enforcement duties pending the audit. The board will meet with legal counsel to determine next steps. It was not everything I wanted, but it was a start. The fallout came fast. 3 days after the meeting, I got a call from Alan. "The HOA's insurance company sent a risk warning that makes the board panic," Alan said. "They reviewed the gate access failures and determined that the administrative overrides created a liability exposure. If someone had been injured or if there had been a fire during one of the lockouts, the HOA could have been sued. The insurer told the board to fix it immediately or they will cancel the policy." "What does that mean for Nancy?" I asked. "It means the board has no choice," Alan said. "Nancy's complaint is ruled unfounded with evidence cited. The HOA agrees to mediation with a neutral third party to review enforcement policies and prevent future abuse." I hung up and let the news sink in. It was not a total victory. Nancy was still a board member, still a resident, still someone I would see in the parking lot. But the power she had wielded was gone. The board could not protect her anymore. The insurance company had forced their hand. 2 weeks later, the independent audit was completed. The auditor found over 60 violations that were not supported by the covenant. The HOA issued refunds totaling more than $15,000 across the neighborhood. My refund was $4,200, the exact amount Nancy had tried to collect with the attorney letter. The check arrived in the mail on a Friday afternoon. I opened the envelope, looked at the amount, and smiled. Then I added the check to the evidence folder and filed it away. Nancy avoided me after that. I saw her once in the parking lot, loading groceries into her car. She glanced at me, then quickly looked away and climbed into the driver's seat. The tow truck remote control that she used to wave like authority was nowhere to be seen. The HOA hired a new management company, one that specialized in compliance and risk management. The new company implemented a formal enforcement policy with written warnings, proper documentation, and appeal procedures. The bright orange windshield stickers disappeared. The late-night patrols stopped. The gate started working consistently. Maria knocked on my door a few weeks later. She looked happier, lighter. "I wanted to thank you," Maria said, "for standing up, for not backing down." "I did not do it alone," I said. "You were there. You showed up." Maria smiled. "We all did." I went back to my routine: work, custody schedule, groceries, the normal chaos of life. But now, when I parked my car in the assigned spot, I did not check the windshield for stickers. I did not scan the parking lot for Nancy. I did not check my watch every 5 minutes, worried about missing a deadline because of an HOA ambush. The paper trail had done its job. The documentation, the recordings, the witness statements, all of it had added up to something Nancy could not fight. She had built her power on intimidation and chaos, and the only way to beat that was with facts, patience, and a refusal to give in. Keep your paper trail close, and I will see you next time.